We will have our scripture today from Galatians 3:23 to 29, followed by a prayer that I have, quote, adapted, unquote, from Reverend Jude Geiger. And I must give apologies to all of those to whom I have registered discomfort with Eugene Peterson's paraphrase of the message, because I found out this was, I thought, a brilliant paraphrase of this Galatians passage. Let us listen to God's word to us. Until the time when we were mature enough to respond freely in faith to the living God, we were carefully surrounded and protected by the Mosaic law. The law was like those Greek tutors with which you are familiar, who escort children to school and protect them from danger or distraction, making sure the children will really get to the place they set out for. But now you have arrived at your destination. By faith in Christ, you are in direct relationship with God. Your baptism in Christ was not just washing you up for a fresh start, it also involved dressing you in an adult faith wardrobe. Christ's life, the fulfillment of God's original promise. In Christ's family, there can be no division into Jew and non-Jew, slave and free, male and female. Among us, you are all equal. That is, we are all in common relationship with Jesus Christ. Also, since you are Christ's family, then you are Abraham's famous descendant, heirs according to the covenant promises. Let us, before we begin to pray, listen to Mechtild of Magdeburg, who was a Beguine in the 13th century, a German Beguine. I cannot dance, O Lord, unless you lead me. If you wish me to leap joyfully, let me see you dance and sing. Then I will leap into love, and from love into knowledge, and from knowledge into the harvest, that sweetest fruit beyond human sense. There I will stay with you whirling. Let us pray. Spirit of renewal, God of many names, we turn this month in our nation's life to reflect on the stories, the heritage, and the struggles of women throughout the ages. We seek to learn from all the voices that have been left unheard. May we pause before the silence of the ages, find who has been left out, and craft new ways of inclusion for every week and every month. May this spiritual practice bring out the voices of all those struggling, all those left apart. May we let go of our assumptions and cold comforts of what is normal to live by, unless it be a standard that is rooted in compassion. May this month of reflection offer opportunities to search for these stories that are different from our own. God of possibility, in our searching, may we come to know ourselves changed. God of the dance, help us to be open to all dances and all dancers in your glorious creation. In the name of the Lord of the dance we pray, Jesus the Christ. Amen. As it happens, I have been so richly blessed in my life that when tasked with seeking women to serve on today's panel of highly accomplished women, I realized that I had been presented with an embarrassment of riches. There are many of you sitting right out there who could just as easily be on this panel. Our panel today consists of 3 women who forged careers in fields sparsely populated by what people of our generation all too often heard referred to as the weaker sex. Weaker indeed. In ruminating on these women this week, that famous quote attributed to Ginger Rogers that she, did everything Fred Astaire did, except she did it backwards and in high heels. Now, for you purists out there, I know there's a question of attribution, but someone said it. So here I am, introducing three remarkable women who, in addition to being masters of their own chosen fields, also happen to be positively captivating and downright delightful to know. Jann Williams, and when I started this, I thought, okay, I want someone from the arts, and someone from the clergy, and someone from science and or medicine. I know medicine is science, but that's why I don't understand it. But our first person represents the arts to me, and she is an architect. Jann Williams had served at Westwood Presbyterian, where I served for 12 years. It was an enormous privilege to serve with Jann. And Jann at Westwood ministers in several capacities, as elder, deacon, choir member, and general expert on all things Westwood. The road Jann took to West LA began in the East. After graduating from Williams College with a major in art, architectural history, and design, she obtained a master's of architecture from Penn and was then licensed in the state of New York, where she plied her trade as a project architect and designer in New York City with a number of luminary architectural firms. During that time, she participated in an international design conference for no man's land outside the North Gate of Jerusalem. And the conference was hosted by the Technion University in Tel Aviv. In the 90s, she moved to LA, where she is in private practice. Many of her architectural achievements can be seen in the Valley, in even Pasadena, and Lamentomy could have been seen in Pacific Palisades. Jann keeps herself out of mischief by volunteering throughout the community. She serves as a member of the Westwood Design Review Board, and she has been the go-to person for several years for the vision and planning of Westwood. And I retired in 2012, and so Jann is a real treasure of Westwood. She also serves on the Westwood Design Review Board of the community of Westwood. In addition to her life at Westwood, she has served as a board member of the Los Angeles Children's Chorus and the Los Angeles Children's Museum. Jann is also in the has sung in the Master Chorale of Los Angeles. Her accomplishments are too many to list, but her receiving the AIA Award for Excellence in Architecture cannot go unacknowledged. She and her husband have two adorable grandchildren, and as I understand it, all of the rest of us who have grandchildren, they can't compare. These are definitely the most adorable grandchildren. And when Jann is not spending time with them, she draws, reads, writes poetry, travels, cooks, and gardens. Our clergy representative is a woman familiar to many of you here, I believe, and that is Reverend Dr. Christine Chakoian. Chris serves as a pastor at Westwood Presbyterian Church in Los Angeles, where she succeeded our dear Lynn Cheney, who, by the way, just is really upset that she could not be here, but she has an ailing mother with whom she's dealing. So we want to keep Lynn and her family in our prayers. Chris's path to ministry began with a BA in Religious Studies from the University of Illinois, where she says she TA'd in New Testament Greek, and full disclosure, she did add an LOL there, so I'm thinking she doesn't want to ask us to translate right now. Her MDiv came from your MDiv came? Yeah, Yale Divinity. It's my computer's fault. And I know your DMin is from McCormick. Previous to taking the call at Westwood, Chris served most recently at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary as Vice President for Seminary Advancement. Her previous calls include lead pastor at First Presbyterian Church in Lake Forest, Illinois, Community Presbyterian Church in Clarendon Hills, Illinois. And in her earlier ministry, she was an associate pastor at Westminster in Portland, Oregon, Fourth Presbyterian in Chicago, and Overbrook Presbyterian Church in Columbus, Ohio. In the PCUSA, she has, of course, served on committees on ministry, committees on preparation for ministry, among a plethora of other Presbytery committees over the year. All of us here know you don't retire in the Presbyterian Church without having done that. But in addition, nationally, she has been a commissioner to GA twice, and in addition to assisting behind the scenes at GA a few times. And Chris was one of the co-sponsors and writers of the motion to name the Armenian genocide as indeed a genocide, in time for the 2015 honoring of the 100th anniversary. As the first denomination to do so, it was one of our finer moments. Chris has also served on the boards of the Chicago Area Presbyterian Homes, McCormick Seminary, the Lebanese American University in Beirut, and her personal favorite, the Presbyterian Publishing Corporation. So we'll ask her to stay behind if any of you have some, submissions for her. Though outside the purview of our denomination, Chris has also, since the 80s, been part of the Movable Feast preaching group. With one of those cohorts was Dean Thompson. And if you want to learn more about how Dr. Chakoian's multitudinous gifts play out, just ask Dean. You're here. Chris shares her life with her husband, John, and I told her I refuse to try to pronounce his name. I just learned how to pronounce hers, who for years led nonprofit mental health social service centers and taught at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. He is now department chair for the psych degree in clinical psych, for their psych degree, that is the Chicago School, in clinical psychology at their California campuses. Chris and John love to travel, explore restaurants, and watch movies. But most of all, they love hanging out with their daughter Annie, who has served as a children's librarian, is now part-time youth director at her Presbyterian church. Annie and her husband Spencer have gifted Chris and John with, I'm sorry, Jann, but these are the fantastic Gemma, who's 3.5. So you may have to step aside. Gemma and her parents live in Albuquerque, where I am certain Chris and John spend a great deal of time. And finally, when I was thinking of someone from science, I'm thinking, well, right next to JPL and Caltech, and then during the fire, I escaped the air up in Eureka, where my daughter was, and I was sitting in her house thinking, I gotta find someone, but let me see, someone in medicine and science, who could that be? And I finally saw the light. And Dr. Holly Haight is here. She came to orthopedic surgery via a decidedly circuitous route. Her undergraduate degree was as a double major at Pomona College in dance and classics. So her love of the humanities has always been abundantly clear. I have to say, one time, and all of us who have had daughters might be able to relate to this. One time, Holly and I were walking, I remember exactly where we were in Taos, New Mexico, and she was 14, and she said, Mom, I have something to tell you that I think might upset you. Oh, well, what is that? I really love Mr. Lopez and science, and I think I might want to do something in science. So that was a classic description of the home in which she grew up, where her father was a scientific genius and her mother was not. As it happened, Holly worked really hard at her great passion, dance, and for a brief time, she danced professionally with several ballet and modern companies in the Bay Area. But she kept hearing the sirens of the science, and they ultimately won, culminating in an MA in kinesiology from San Francisco State on her path to medicine through medical school and orthopedic residency at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, and that was followed by a fellowship at Stanford in joint replacement. During her time at Mayo, she received the prestigious Coventry Award for Orthopedic Research, which sent her to Exeter, England, to study in the footsteps of John Charnley, the inventor of modern-day hip replacement. And after her training, Holly joined the Kaiser orthopedic staff in Sacramento, where she also served as chief of surgery. In 2023, she found herself drawn to what she and her husband called God's country when she was recruited to hang her shingle in Eureka, California. Holly now works at Providence Medical Group and serves on the staff of Providence St. Joseph Hospital in Eureka and Redwood Memorial Hospital in Fortuna, where she developed a regionally acclaimed same-day outpatient surgery joint replacement program. In what she laughingly calls her spare time, Holly loves spending time with family, traveling, reading, boating, cooking, and, of course, eating. She also enjoys almost all genres of music, including classical, rock, country, and opera. Holly has 3 guys in her life who keep her grounded: her husband, Randall, and what used to be the cutest grandchildren in the world, but now they're 18 and 13, and they're still delightful and cute, but I have to cede to the preschoolers. So her sons are Rowan, who is at UCSD, and Ian, who is in high school. And I would love to welcome you all. And our moderator is going to be our dear Nancy Moore, who, as you know or may not know, I just found out, was a specialist in urban ministry. She has her MDiv from Fuller, and she taught at the Claremont School of Theology for 16 years. 16 years. So I think someday we need to hear her talk about urban ministry. Wouldn't that be interesting? So please come and sit and be welcome. Okay, thank you. Will do. Do we need one more glass of water? Oh, I'm fine. Okay.
Someone want to pass this down? Okay, there we go. This is going to be fun. We're already starting to have fun. I know you have some wonderful questions, and we're going to give you time to ask them in a little while, but we have some first. So if you could turn on that mic, then you can just grab it, and we will go. So the first question is one that came up to me when I was in high school, talking about literature. And the paradigm was that the first person through the door is not particularly good, but they break the door down. Then there is a person or persons who hold the door open, but they don't go all the way through. And then there is the persons who make it all the way through the door, and they're the blossom. And this was referring to Shakespeare, and don't ask me any more about that because it was a long time ago when I was in high school. But if we think about that paradigm, Where are you? Are you breaking the door? Are you holding the door open? Or are you through the door, in your opinion, in your career, in your area of expertise?
I'm going to put this here. Can you all hear? Being heard is not usually a problem that I have. So, well, this is interesting because I've thought about this a little bit recently. I think that, so I'm an orthopedic surgeon and I do hip and knee replacements. So in orthopedic surgery, when I was starting in my career, I think, within the last 10 years or so probably, the numbers were that about 6% of orthopedic surgeons were women, and about 3% of joint replacement surgeons were women. So, so I was definitely going into a field that not very many women were in. So, and I've been giving this some reflection because I'm currently, today I'm actually ditching the nation's largest, probably the world's largest orthopedic meeting, which is in San Diego, the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons. And so I was there yesterday, and I drove up last night to do this, and I'm going back down to the meeting tomorrow. But, and then there's another, so as at these meetings, they are just almost entirely dominated by men in dark suits. So, and I've been going to these meetings for the last 20 years, so I've been seeing it evolve. And I remember, I'm also a member of the American Association of Hip and Knee Surgeons, which you have to apply to get into based on the number of joint replacements you do per year, and you have to get references from other acclaimed, other joint replacement surgeons. So I'm a member of that meeting, and that meeting meets every year, and I go to that almost every year too. And that meeting is also a bunch of men in suits. And it used to always be mostly white men in suits, so white men in dark suits. And when I started going to these meetings, it was very, very rare to see a woman there at all in any way, shape, or form. In fact, one of my funniest stories is I remember going to this meeting, and at the break, we would go out to the bathroom. And this was the only place I think I've ever been in my life where the men were in a line to get into the bathroom. And I waltzed on by, kind of like, I'm just going in, guys. But in the last many years, I've noticed the makeup of these meetings change for the better, and orthopedics, they've actually been actively promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I've seen the makeup of the panels change. So I've seen more women on the panels. I've seen more minority representation on the panels, and it's really nice. But I'm also going to tell another story where of a woman. There is a young woman who is really up and coming in joint replacement and orthopedics right now. She's several years younger than I. She's probably only, well, I'm going to say maybe 5 years or so, 4 or 5 years behind me in her career. But she's in the leadership file, like the leadership chain, to become probably one of the presidents of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons. I'm sure she's going to be the president of the American Association of Hip and Knee Surgeons. Her name's Antonia Chen, and she's at UT. But Antonia, Dr. Chen, was a resident at Stanford when I was there doing my joint replacement fellowship. And I met her there, and we didn't work together a lot, but I met her and I talked about joints, and she was trying to figure out what she wanted to do, and I explained my experience, and I said, I love doing joints, and if you want to do joints, you should certainly do it. So I think about, I'm going to say 3 or 4 years ago at the Hip and Knee Society meeting, I ran into Antonia, because of course she was speaking and running something, and she was very pleased to meet me, and she told me that I was the person who inspired her to go into joint replacement. And that when we were at Stanford together, she was shocked and surprised and happy to see a woman doing joint replacements, and that speaking to me really inspired her, and so I was her mentor. And so that impresses me. So I think that story that's where I'm holding open the door. Because Antonia is doing I sort of consciously decided not to do that for many reasons, but I opened the door for people like Antonia to go through.
Good for you. Good for you.
Do you want to ask another question, or does someone else want to answer this question? Do you want to have everyone do the same
Is
question?
this is working. I think when I was in graduate school at University of Pennsylvania, half the class were women. But it was something that I think our dean was sort of surprised about. And I remember that we had a competition, and the nice thing about architectural competitions is that they're anonymous, because you put your identity on the back of your drawings and they judge the drawings and then they flip it over. And there was a competition in school, and I took first place, and my roommate took second place, and our other girlfriend took third. And all the boards were flipped over, and the dean turned around. He said, "Where are the guys? Where are the boys?" And we all looked at each other, and we were sort of pleased with ourselves. But I do think things were changing at that point. When I worked in New York for some really fine architectural firms, the one that I remember working for was that a third of the architects were women, which was a very high percentage at the time, and this was in the early 80s. So I think the progression, I was probably one of those women who came through, but I remember doing a presentation, and we're meeting the clients for the first time, and of course all the material was up on the walls, and one of the clients came over to me and he said, I'd really like a cup of coffee. And I said, I would too, and I don't know who to ask either. And of course, apologies, and it was fine, because you understand how all of this evolves. But I left New York and came to LA and started a residential practice, in part because I had small children. And there was a firm I was interested in working with, and I was really told that unless I committed 60 hours a week, they wouldn't be able to give me a desk. And I thought, great, I'll earn enough money to help pay somebody else to raise my children. And so I thought, I don't think I want to do that. And I was fortunate that my husband and that I could have the liberty to make a decision about how to practice. And so I did. I started my own practice. And the wonderful thing about it is, of course, in designing homes, it's the full package. It's all four walls, it's a roof, it's a freestanding building. And I was working with families and a very empathetic clientele to be working for. If I got a call, my daughter was sick at school, it was perfectly all right, Jann, go take care of your daughter. And but in the corporate world, it would not have been as forgiving. So I've been very grateful for that work. But it is lonelier than working in an office. And so the professional, groups, that are at the AIA, became pretty important to me, because that is how I made friends with other architects. And one of the fun things about serving on the Westwood Design Review Board is I am with 4 other licensed architects, and we do, people come in and say, I want to build this building in Westwood, and, we talk about it, and are there improvements or changes that can be made to make it fit better, in Westwood. And those discussions I find really interesting, to be with other architects and to hear their opinions on these projects. And we're all from different backgrounds. And the marvelous thing is that we all know what good design is, and we agree on what good design is. It doesn't matter whether you went to Stanford or whether you went to, Penn, or whether you were at Yale. There's something there that we're taught that shows up all the time, and it's really fun to discover that and to have those conversations. So I think I've been one of the people through the door, but there have been moments when I've been the first and the only. and they've been kind of fun too, actually.
Yeah.
I think that's my phone.
Oh, I'll just pull this.
Maybe go turn that
So,
off. That's a pain.
I can relate to both of you in that. So I was ordained in 1983, and I got to that place because of the people who shepherded me. There were wonderful groups in my church when I was growing up in the suburbs of Chicago. There were wonderful professors at University of Illinois. I became a religious studies major because I had gotten very kind of emotional faith in high school. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can take a religious studies course for credit. So I took Bible as literature in this state-run university, and I'm like, okay, I think that I can't just check my brain at the door. So that's where I started in this intellectual pursuit of religion. And it was liberating. And it didn't take away any of the emotional or spiritual, but it was just this aspect of it that I hadn't even seen before. And then at college, my twin sister and I both went to McKinley Foundation, where Dick and Marianne Lundy were serving when they were still together as a couple. And Marianne Lundy was the Christian Ed director there, and brought, I think it was Phyllis Tribble, who was her roommate. And so now all of a sudden I'm looking at feminist theology, and that was remarkable. So those pieces kind of pressed me towards seminary. I decided on Yale because I wanted a school that wasn't only intellectual the way I felt University of Chicago was in the Div School. And I also didn't want a seminary that was primarily for pastoral training, but not the rest of it. So it was between Princeton Seminary and Yale, and I decided that I was going to spend the rest of my life with Presbyterians. So, I did the Yale. And there I realized how women's entry into ministry was very different in different denominations. There were Southern Baptist women there. There were Episcopalians. There were Lutherans and Congregationalists. And each one reaching into a different place in the doorway. So that's how it all started. And by the way, my identical twin sister, Karen Chakoian, just retired from her pastorate in Granville, Ohio.
Wow, good for you.
Yeah, so we still, she still edits my sermons. We used to edit them back and forth. But I wouldn't be in ministry without the men and women who opened the door for me. So Dean and the Movable Feast Study Group, they were the ones who put my name in to different churches as openings happened. They were the ones who helped when it was like, what the heck do I do now, as every ministry has. And they were the ones who held me up when things got really rough. And it was both men and women that helped me. And I stand on the shoulders of the women who came before me. Without them pressing against that stained glass ceiling, I wouldn't be here. There was a time when I pastored the largest church headed by a woman, and that was in Lake Forest, Illinois. And I got really tired of, forgive me, gentlemen, the retired CEO white men patting me on the head. So I don't miss that part of it. I do miss that the Midwest, but I absolutely love the warmth and the palm trees here, and the diversity of thinking and openness that I find here too.
Oh, thank you. We could be here for a long time, but some of us are going to have dinner. So I want to ask you my last question, which is really one of Peggy's. This is a hard one, I think, and then you will have a chance. So you've been working at breakneck speed for 6 weeks now, and you finally have a day that's just yours. Your children are happy, everybody in your life is happy. What are you going to do? Where are you going to go?
Should I start this time? All right. I'm so glad Peggy mailed us some questions. They were great help in terms of trying to, I remember this one. And my thought went immediately that I would want to do something entirely different than what I had been dashing around doing and holding together for the last 6 weeks. So I think for me, just walking out of the house, being in the backyard, feeling the sun, and gardening, putting my hands into the dirt, feeling something so physically different from holding a pencil or working on a computer screen or meeting with clients or talking to subcontractors and worrying about schedules and stuff, but to feel something rich and warm and, that would sort of take the push, of my hand, and to feel that would be a real refreshing moment and real refreshing time for me.
Oh, I don't want to hold that thing. I still have kids at home. Well, I have one kid at home, so I'm still doing the working mom thing. My son's in high school, and he is in everything. Like, he's just got everything going on. And I'm still relatively new in my practice because I've lived there for 2 years, and so I'm building a new practice, and I'm working, very, very full-time. And so for me, a day for myself, I want to do nothing. Honestly, just like, I feel like I'm very boring because I read that question. I'm like, I just want to do nothing. I had a friend of mine in residency who used to say, I just want to sit in a chair and stare at the wall. And so, yeah, a day on my own would involve sleeping as long as I want to without any alarm going off, having a cup of coffee, maybe reading a book, maybe taking a bath, maybe exercising, maybe not, just not having anything planned at this point. Yeah.
I remember those days. Oh, man. I would sleep in. I would read the paper and do the Sudoku. And I would go out for a walk in our neighborhood, and I would do the laundry because I could actually get it done. And to have something on my list that can actually be completed. And then I would hope that my husband and I would go out for dinner and maybe go to the theater.
Well, we're all refreshed by that. And so, Pam? No. Karen is going to take it. Okay.
We're going to have a Q&A now for any of you, and Karen is going to
Dean.
Thank you. Is this on? In your respective fields, how prevalent is the ongoing experience of discrimination against females? Is that a prevalent experience in your respective fields?
Let me just start by saying no. It's really not, at least in the territory I'm in now. And I will say, because of the mainline church's decline, there are fewer men going into ministry now. And so it's a very different field than it used to be.
Yeah, orthopedics is a fraternity. I mean, there's jokes about, in medicine, they call the orthodox the ortho bros. So, yeah, the bros, the ortho bros. Yeah, so, and there's sort of a stereotype of orthopedic surgeons as being strong as an ox and half as smart. Or, so, and it really is a fraternity. I mean, I had that feeling going in. And I mean, I think in all of medicine, getting through residency is sort of like a hazing experience. And so I was in a group of a fairly large orthopedic residency. There were 10 of us. And at the time, I started my residency in 2002. There were 2 women in our class. Mayo actually was fairly advanced because they almost always had at least one and usually around 2 women in each class at that time, which was a lot. And I didn't feel a lot of discrimination from my classmates at that point. I mean, we just all bonded together because it was just an experience that we all had to go through. But I've always been kind of a little bit of one of the guys. In college, I haven't been a really girly girl, and I think in orthopedics there has always been a lot of pressure not to be. So, whereas I think there is a definite awareness of we need to diversify and we need to admit more women, and there are lots of movements designed to help empower and recruit more women and minorities into orthopedics. At the same time, there's still the sort of fraternity type feeling like, you've got to be strong enough to do this. And, if you're someone who's going to do your hair and do your nails and do your makeup, then maybe you're not going to make it as an orthopedic surgeon. And so I think the discrimination is not as blatant as it used to be, but it's a little bit more subversive. And I think that we will find more equality or equity when we get to the point where you can be a girly girl and still do orthopedics.
Interesting. I think when I was working in New York in the 80s, I think discrimination against women was pretty rampant. And I think there's a lot of ego in architecture. Who's the designer? This big word. And in a firm I worked for, there was an incredibly talented woman who did a design for a high-rise building that was just knock your socks off. And she had actually won the Prix de Rome, which is a really extraordinary prize to win. And, her reputation was that she was hard to get along with. And I thought, no, they can't stand it that she's as good as she is. And when she left the firm, a lot of us looked at each other and thought, this is a really bad sign. Another firm I worked for was entirely different. A lot of the people working there were married and even had kids, and so the air was different. And so I think you sort of have to look on the culture of the firm. But we had sort of phrases for a lot of the firms, the Society of Men, or, can't promote females, and because of, the initials of the firms and stuff. And we knew, because we would share stories with each other about where was a good place to work and where was not a good place to work. So we would try and help each other, find positions. I think in California, I think in Los Angeles loves its architects. We have two, what's the Haight? Pritzker Award winners in LA. No other city in the world has that. And a lot of women I know have their own practices. And big firms like Gensler, there are a lot of women on staff there. And I think the president of the AIA, which is my Society American Institute of Architects, have had women presidents, probably 4 or 5 times, So I do think the attitude is very different here in Los Angeles. And I've not been in New York for a long time, so I'm not really sure. But Deborah Burke is now chairman of the Yale Architecture School, and she's fabulous practice. Jeannie Gang is in Chicago, and she's got a tremendous practice as well. So they're certainly winning prizes and getting national recognition, and that's been really exciting to watch over the years.
Catherine?
This question is for each of you. During your training for your profession, what was the percentage of women of color in the training? And of that group, what was the largest ethnic group in that group?
I think in my training, well, first of all, I did my residency in the Midwest, where there aren't a lot of people of color to begin with. In the 5 years that I was there, I don't think we had any women of color. We did have one man. There was an Indian guy. There was an African-American man who didn't meet the Bro criteria and was forced out of the program. The Bro criteria. He did not get along with the residency advisor for whatever reason, and he had some trouble, and he was, rather than being helped along, he was basically forced out of the program. There was another Indian guy who was brilliant, but not a particularly excellent surgeon. Actually, he was kind of a bad surgeon, but he, rather than being helped along, he too was forced out of the program. So that was in my training. There are many more women of color now. I can't give a number because it's low, because the number of women itself is low. But we do have a group now called Women in Arthroplasty, arthroplasty is joint replacement. So at the Hip and Knee Society meeting, they have a subgroup called Women in Arthroplasty. And the first meeting I went to, however many years ago, the Women in Arthroplasty group had maybe 15 or 20 people in it. Now there's 150 or more, and there are several women of color there. And when I look around that room, there are many residents in training, many women of color. Mostly the largest percentage is African American or Black. Does anyone want you guys want to answer?
Yeah, back in the day, there were precious few, and I would say we had 2 Asian American women. 50% of the Yale Divinity School class was women, and it was very white.
When I was at Penn, half the class were women. There were no African-American women. We did have 2 African-American men, and Sam, dear friend of mine, now practices in San Francisco. I think we probably had, I know one Asian woman because she was a roommate of mine, and I think there may have been one others, but other than that, it was all white.
So today, most of us are aware of the political situation in which DEI programs, diversity, equity, et cetera, are being attacked. And down in the government, supposedly wiped out. And I just wonder, in your professional organizations and in your employment, even though it seems to all be in California at this time, what are you hearing about DEI, and what are you hearing in your professional organizations are responses, if any, to that?
You know, right now, my profession is so focused on the recovery from the fires that I haven't heard a lot of discussion about DEI. So I really don't know how to answer the question, but I'd like to think, since so many women and African Americans and Asians are part of my profession now, that we support all the efforts, you know, for inclusion, because we need the talent, we need the brains, we need the perspectives. So I think that's the best I can say right now.
Yeah, I hope I'm not being naive, but I feel hopeful. I kind of feel like the efforts to be more inclusive and encourage all different kinds of people to enter all different kinds of careers is so self-evident and such a no-brainer that I'm hopeful that I feel like that's a train that you can't really stop. Certainly I don't know how much federal funding for these programs comes into medicine. For example, the meetings I'm at, the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, the American Association of Hip and Knee Surgeons, I don't know that they get federal money to promote DEI. I think they're just doing it because we all know that it's the right thing to do. At the meeting, for example, the meetings I go to, and this meeting is on my mind because I've been there, but there's so much press and so much photography. I mean, they take pictures of the panels and pictures of who is at the meeting, and I feel like the photographers are all the pictures I see. Maybe it's because I'm looking for it, but the pictures when they send out their pamphlets and say, this is what we did in the meeting today, there's a panel that has a woman on it and an African American and someone from Taiwan, and they have the Japanese, and they always have a guest nation. So like last year, the guest nation was Egypt. So I feel like that awareness and that effort to become more inclusive is something that is not going to go away because the federal government is withholding funding for certain measures. And so that's my hope.
Yes, because of the purported separation of church and state, our issue is not impacted directly, but many pastors and seminary presidents and so forth are going through the what can we do to be protecting the people who are most vulnerable and creating a place of respect instead of diminishment.
You may well be familiar with this cartoon. It's pretty famous. A boardroom with the white men in suits and one woman sitting there, and the chair, or whoever is the head or seems to be, says, "An excellent idea, Miss Fraser. Which of you men would like to have it?" I want to know, number one, every time I've told that, somebody recognizes their experience in other women. But the other part of that is a more serious question even than the voicelessness is if Miss Fraser stands up for herself, she becomes the pushy broad.
Right.
And I want to know how you work with that balance when you're in when you are not in the 51%. category.
I'll jump in. For me, this has been, I think, one of the most important things I've had to learn. Because in college, I read a lot of feminist literature had been written, and I was, it took me a long time to realize that the guys weren't reading it. And ego is a big part of my field. And I began to realize that the way to have that conversation was to define it by myself. Is that it wasn't clear, I could start saying things. It's not clear to me why, we're making this decision, or I don't understand what your thinking is, and explain to me, and defining it in terms of myself. And the wonderful thing about that is then the other person has to explain themselves. And if they can't, and there's an element of embarrassment, then it begins to crack open, and it becomes a little bit more genuine. And I think, for me, that has been a very helpful way to navigate the field, because it isn't just with other architects. I can have some pretty stubborn subcontractors who really don't want to work with a woman. And they're from an entirely different culture than mine. And so I have to, to be respectful, because they do have, they do bring an expertise to the field, but to really navigate that conversation to make sure we get what we need. I'm not horsing around with gravity. It's like, you really have to be persistent and strong and understand where the boundary is. But there have been moments when I've had to say, no, I'm in charge, this is the way it has to be done. And after going through those other steps, I sort of gain more respect when I get to that position than if I start out there. So it, and the more years you have to, the more you practice it, the easier it gets. But it's real. It's a real issue.
So in medicine in general, but more so in surgery, especially more so in orthopedic surgery, there is a perception and a just that you can't be weak. There's just no room for weakness. In orthopedics, it's physical weakness, but in addition to just any perception of lack of confidence or emotional weakness in any way is you don't get promoted. You don't get into med school, you don't get into residency, you don't get into fellowship, you don't graduate, you just don't get ahead. And of course, with the long-standing vision of women as being the weaker sex, I think in my profession, if the woman who isn't going to stand up for herself is not even going to get a seat at the table. And so from my perspective, I really haven't had a lot of that, like, someone taking credit for my idea, or because I'm just not going to let that happen. But kind of as I was alluding to before, I'm going to tell a story that my sister, who is at the UN right now, she is at the Presbyterian delegate to the UN Commission on the Status of Women, which is pretty awesome. She texted us something that the UN Secretary General said, or pardon me if I'm getting all the attributions wrong, but in response to the basic argument that we are fine with the advancement of women as long as they know what they're doing. So, the whole concept that women, as long as you're competent, then you can be equal. So I guess equality is fine as long as women are competent. And I think the UN response to that is, we will know that we have equity when even the incompetent woman can get promoted to a position of power. Which is funny, but to be honest, it's kind of true. And like I said before, when the girly girl can do orthopedics, then there's more equity. So when the woman who is shy and soft-spoken can still have a seat at the table and have her ideas listened to and still get into the orthopedic program, then we have a little more equity.
Yeah. Because there's certain machine competence and men go way far.
Right.
And my brief answer is, it depends. When it's about strategy in many ways. When I was at the table with kind of bossy white guys, there were times when I needed just to stand up for myself, and other times when it was just more strategic to say, you know, I remember so-and-so talking about la, 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 and I thought that was a brilliant idea. So it's a little perhaps sardonic or Machiavellian, but it worked.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing your experiences, both for the training you've engaged in and the colleagues that you've had. And this was started to be touched on, but I'm interested in the populations that you serve and what those experiences have been with respect to you being a woman. You know, the parishioner, the patient, and the client.
Well, just briefly, it is a wonderful treat that I followed Lynn Cheney, and so I didn't have to crack that stained glass ceiling. So there just is not a problem there. There are some pastoral care situations where especially men may want to talk with other men, and mazel tov. There are situations where women would want to talk with other women, and I don't take that personally. I think, how do we get the right care for the people who need it when they need it?
I've loved my being a woman in orthopedics or in orthopedics. I do joint replacements, so my patients are by and large older patients, and I have a lot of my older women who are specifically seek me out because I'm a woman. I've had younger women who seek me out because I'm a woman. Mm-hmm. I have had older men who say they like to have all women doctors because they know that women have to basically do it all backwards and in heels. But it is true that you have to be, just like it is for minorities, you have to be better, stronger, smarter, faster than a man in order to get into the room, in order to have the job. And so a lot of people use that to their advantage, and they go, I know she's smarter than the other guys because she had to be to get through medical school. So, but I've also served in Minnesota. There actually is I know I said they're all white in Minnesota, but there actually is a sizable Muslim population. And so there I was in training, but I had many women who would say, you know, the doctor would say, you have to go in because she only wants to be examined by a woman. So there's a lot more room for more women in my field.
Interesting. We used to say that when I did large-scale commercial work that the developers were the last American cowboys. That they'd come in blazing, shooting guns. They were going to, you know, take over. And they were really a lot of fun to work with. Impossible at times, yes. And thank goodness I wasn't the only one dealing with them. But working at that scale was really exciting to have, you know, to be designing high-rise buildings and to work that into the network of the city that we were, you know, working in was fun. Being an architect for single-family homes has really been a delight because I have worked with couples and families at all the different stages that families go through. Adding rooms because babies were coming, converting rooms because babies turn into teenagers, bringing the main bedroom down to the first floor because you don't want to walk up the stairs anymore, and you're going to trade that with your college-age kids. And I love those stories. I love understanding where they are and who they are and their lives. I did a house for a couple that were married each for the second time, and they each had about 5 grandchildren. So Christmas meant at least them as a couple and probably 4 other couples as parents and 10 grandchildren going to be in the house at the same time. So the size of the dining room table was pretty important. And you designed the kitchen based on the size of the dining room table so that you could make enough food. But it was really a lot of fun. And I love those conversations. And so for me, the clients have been, when they're wild cowboys, very entertaining, and trying to get them to get their feet on the ground and get the budget to align with their dreams was always a challenge, but, great work to do. And working with people as they go through their stages of their lives has, I think, been a real privilege. So I've really enjoyed it.
Nancy, thank you. What a wonderful way to end, with these amazing women celebrating the people that they work for. Wow. And we need to celebrate them. So would you give them just a celebration? Thank you all so much.